We are live, Delegate Bandari. You can go ahead now.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to the forum, Surviving Domestic Violence During the Pandemic. First and foremost, I would like to thank Rosaline from the Baltimore County Commission for Women for all of her help in setting this up. We could not have done this without her. And thank you to our panelists, my Senator Kathy Klasmar is here, Amanda, Laurie, Amy, Valerie, for joining and providing your expertise and insight. And thank you to State Senator Kathy Klasmar for stopping by as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, the New England Journal of Medicine wrote about an increase in intimate partner violence during COVID. And one of the things they noted was that while the domestic violence hotline and other groups anticipated increased calls, they saw about a 50% drop in calls. And that is not because that violence had stopped, quite the opposite. But those affected were not in a position to get the help they needed. That is why we are here today to provide information on resources in Baltimore County and navigating the system for those who need it and the beyond. So thank you all for coming and providing this necessary information. And thank you so much for all these media partners who are doing this live nationwide. Indianapolis, DC-based online media, Casocas, New York-based online media, BRT Nepal, Colorado, based in Hollywood, cover California, average time, New York-based, and so many of them. And thank you. Senator Kathy Klasmar, want to say a few words? Yeah, we can hear you, Senator. I think Senator has some technical error there. We'll join her. We'll connect her. And Amanda, you want to go now? Executive Director, turn around. And now you guys, whenever Senator joins, you will have a very few remarks.
Jerry, we're going to turn this over to Roslyn from the Commission
Roslyn,
for
okay,
Women,
sure.
And she's gonna...
Go ahead, Roslyn.
So good afternoon. As the delegate already said, my name is Roslyn Berkowitz, and I represent the Baltimore County Commission for Women. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who will be Laurie Ruth. Laurie Ruth grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, and graduated from the University of Michigan. She graduated from the University of Maryland School of Law in 1993. After clerking in the Baltimore City Circuit Court, she spent time in private practice in Towson as a family law attorney. Since 2008, she has been the legal director at the Women's Law Center of Maryland. The Women's Law Center advocates for the rights of women and children through direct representation, including in protective order cases and family law cases. The Women's Law Center also has several statewide hotlines to assist self-represented litigants. Laurie is a registered lobbyist and travels to Annapolis to urge legislators to adopt laws that level the playing field for women. She is happily married with 3 almost grown sons. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you, Roz. Hi, everybody. As Roz said, my name is Laurie Ruth. I'm going to get right to it because I know we have a bunch of speakers who have a lot to say. I will just ask Patrick, Delegate Bandari's assistant, to keep me apprised of the clock. And also he's going to manage my small PowerPoint that I prepared because of my own technical either ineptitude or something. So you can go ahead and start with the first PowerPoint slide if you want to share that. And I'll just tell you when to move forward, although it might be self-evident. I've been asked to speak about sort of the legal perspective, the court perspective in times of COVID, and I did try and direct this towards Baltimore County specifically, but anybody in Maryland should know that there is a domestic violence service provider in every county and Baltimore City in Maryland. And so a lot of what I'm saying applies all over the state of Maryland. And I venture to say probably every state in the country has something similar going on to everything that I'm talking about. If you do the next piece of the slide, it's just a reference to our law where you can find the actual law on seeking a protective order. I'm mostly going to talk today about intimate partner violence. There is a provision in Maryland law these are called protective orders. There's a provision in Maryland law called peace orders, but most of intimate partner violence, I hope all as of yesterday, October 1st, has really been moved from the peace order scenario into the protective order scenario. The way you can get a protective order in Maryland, just briefly, is dependent upon your relationship to the alleged abuser. So basically, if you're married, cohabitants, child in common, divorced or ever were married, and family members, or have a sexual relationship, or there has been sexual assault or rape, you're eligible for a protective order. And I should just thank the legislature for finally passing a bill that added rape and sexual assault to the protective order statute effective yesterday. So that's the very down and dirty on who can get a protective order. This next slide, if you want to hit it, Patrick, is what kind of abuse is covered, just to briefly let you know. I think during COVID, especially, what we see, and the other people on this panel can probably speak more closely to actual scenarios that people are encountering being stuck in the same household with their abuser. But emotional abuse does not count in Maryland for seeking a protective order. You'll see threat of serious imminent bodily harm is part of the definition of abuse for which you can seek a protective order. But a lot of what abusers do is not that. A lot of what abusers do is in that power and control dynamic of belittling, of putting you down, of making you feel like you have no other choices, of saying nobody will believe you, of telling you you're stupid. All of those examples don't actually qualify you in Maryland law for a protective order. So it has to be some sort of demonstration of physical abuse or a threat of serious imminent bodily harm, which of course is different depending upon who you appear in front of, whether they're going to see it as a threat. We often have trouble with imminency, and I'll just tell you a little story. I'll never forget, we had a case once many years ago now where our client's abuser was in New Jersey, and he said, I'm getting in the car and I'm driving to come and kill you. So it was about 3 hours and 15 minutes away from where he had said that. And our client sought a protective order and the judge denied it, saying, well, that's not imminent. You can just go somewhere else. Go just hide, and he won't be able to find you anyway. You've got 3 hours before he comes here to kill you. So imminency can be a problem, and whether it's an actual threat can be a problem as well. Any rape or sexual offense, even within a marriage, within a dating relationship, counts. Any attempted rape or attempted sexual offense. False imprisonment, we often see is when people get locked in their bedroom, for example, and their abuser won't let them out. Stalking, which is a hard case to make, but happens a lot. And the new one, like I said, is rape or sexual assault within the past 6 months. And we think of that as stranger rape or date rape, not somebody with whom you have had a sexual relationship with before. So you can go to the next slide. So essentially, now, today, where you can apply for a protective order if the courts are open is any of our district courts or the circuit court. Baltimore County has 3 district courts and the circuit court on Bosley Avenue. There's, as everybody may know, there's been a lot of running around of the district courts in Baltimore County for the past 6 or 9 months because Towson's court moved over to what we call New Catonsville. Old Catonsville shut down because it's old and inefficient and no longer has a commissioner there. And then October 9th, Towson is moving back to Towson, and Old Catonsville is moving to New Catonsville, and there will be a commissioner there. So if the courts are closed, which is any time that's not 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, you can go to a commissioner and seek a protective order. In the beginning of COVID, the Chief Judge Barbera issued an order that you could only seek a protective order from a commissioner's office 24/7, and the courts were not taking walk-ins for protective orders. They lifted that June 6th, and since then, you've been able to go back to court, the court itself, rather than the commissioner, to seek a protective order when the courts are open. You'll see it on another slide. I think we could close up again. And I think that this would become an issue about where you go to seek an order. Oftentimes, if a person can, it's easier to wait until the court is open to seek a protective order because it cuts down the number of steps you have to get, the number of times you have to go to court essentially to see if you can get the protective order and get the relief you want. But I think all of us doing this realize that if there's an uprising in the COVID numbers and whatnot, the court could shut down again and go back to being only go to a commissioner. When it was only the commissioner, you couldn't bring anybody with you. You had to go in on your own with a mask. And certainly when you go to court now, everybody has to wear a mask. They ask you the standard questions you've probably heard in a lot of places by now. They take your temperature. You can't bring friends and family. You can bring a witness. Certainly if there's somebody who's going to testify, they're entitled to come in. But the days when people had all their friends and family and support system and mother and father and everything are gone. The courts are limiting the number of people allowed in any given courtroom. And I am very concerned, to be honest with you, when they go back to Towson, the old Towson building. It's been closed for renovations of their HVAC and whatnot, but the courtrooms are very small. And we used to stand in the Towson courtrooms bumper to bumper, shoulder to shoulder, standing room only, 75 people in a place with seating for 30 people. And they don't even have a big area inside the courthouse where you could stand and wait to be called into a particular courtroom. So I think they're going to have some challenges at that particular courthouse. New Catonsville is big and beautiful and very large courtrooms. And I was there and they probably had 40 cases on the docket, but everybody was able to sit 6 feet apart. And you have to testify with your mask on. The judge has a mask on. The bailiff has a mask on. It's taken pretty seriously. It took them a while, quite frankly, to enforce all of this, but by now things are pretty settled. It was a very complex time from March to probably June 8th when they reopened. And I give a lot of credit to the courts, even though I am known to get very exasperated with them as well at times. I will say, they were trying just as hard as everybody else to figure this out, and they still are. Just as an aside, they start Monday with jury trials, which has been a tremendous challenge for them to figure out how to do it safely. And I'll be interested to see how it progresses because it's really, really hard to impanel a jury and follow the Constitution, essentially, to get a jury of your peers, as it's called, when you can't have enough of a jury pool size-wise to pick. But all of these things are ongoing, and the courts talk about them all the time. The district court has had meetings 2 to 3 times a week with all of their administrative judges. The circuit court has meetings twice a week, I think. There's been a lot of discussion. Every jurisdiction does it a little bit differently. So I'm trying to tell you the basics, but you sort of have to, if you're not in Baltimore County, figure out what you're talking about. In Baltimore County, you can request a remote hearing. It is discretionary to the court. We've had inexplicable denials of requests for a remote hearing. We have a client who is in her 80s. She's clearly at high risk for corona exposure. We requested 2 to 3 times to be heard remotely and were denied each time. The courts have done a really good job in amping up how to do an actual trial or hearing remotely, because as you know, you sometimes have evidence. So you have a police report, you have the medical reports from when you went to the hospital after being injured. All of that has to be admitted into court according to the rules of evidence, and you have to show it to the other side. You have to get it admitted before the judge can look at it. So they have developed email processes and other ways to submit evidence into court remotely and let everybody have an opportunity to see it as if they were in the courtroom. Personally, I have not had to do that. I'm quite grateful, but I've talked to many lawyers, including on staff at the Women's Law Center, who have done it. And, you know, there's fits and starts, as there have been with all of this, but it is possible to do, and the courts have been trying to be responsive about making it easy. You may or may not know, in March, they started to use Zoom, and then the governor's office, Governor Hogan's office, came out and said it wasn't safe for some reason, which many lawyers, and myself included, found odd because courts are open venues. So I'm not sure who they were trying to hide the hearings from, because you're allowed to go and sit in a courtroom. So you're allowed to go and sit on a Zoom and listen to court, other than certain ones that are shielded, like juvenile cases and CINA, child in need of assistance cases. But so they had to go off of Zoom. That caused a lot of consternation. Skype for Business didn't work very well. WebEx, Google Meeting, whatever. They finally entered a contract with Zoom, and they have Zoom for Government. Most courts are now back to using Zoom. They find it overall to be the best venue for this, with the best connectivity, the ability for breakout rooms, and other, you know, things I couldn't tell you because I'm not a techie that they seem to prefer. But that's not true of everywhere. So some places are still on WebEx, some places are still on Skype for Business. You just have to figure out your jurisdiction, what's going on if you're going to be appearing remotely. On this slide that Patrick put up, some courts have been reluctant to order abusers out of the home. So, you know, the relief that you can get from a protective order is a stay away, meaning vacate the home, no contact by email, by third party, by text, by telephone, by mail. You'll see it in all different ways, in all different orders. But, you know, often what needs to happen is the people need to be separated from each other. And that means vacating the abuser from the home if they're living together. We have seen a reluctance on the part of courts statewide to do that. The most egregious example I can think of was a person who we did not represent. She called one day from Baltimore City. She actually had asked for a peace order. She was in a roommate situation with she was a woman, and there was a male roommate who became interested in her amorously. She was not interested, and then it escalated to him, you know, doing things that made her very afraid. And she went to court and got a peace order, but the judge refused to vacate him from the apartment. Instead, he just ordered him to stay away from her bedroom. So when she called me, she was calling from a hotel because she did not feel safe when he was just told, don't go to bedroom 2, stay in bedroom 1. But you can also be in the kitchen, dining room, living room, and laundry room whenever she's around. So these are the types of things that the courts have tried to figure out. And I think that Delegate Bandari referenced this decrease in calls, but apparently an increase in actual incidents of domestic violence. I think some of my colleagues on this panel may talk about that. We saw a tremendous drop in calls March, April. In May, they started picking up, and then it's just been gangbusters really since May, June, when the courts reopened. And when I speak about this, I sometimes mix in our work we do in family law cases, extended family law cases, because all of those were postponed. People were, you know, not able to move forward to get any finality in their divorce, custody, child support, alimony, marital property cases. And those are now slowly being addressed by the courts. So I hope that they've gotten over this. We have not recently had a case where a judge has refused to vacate the abuser if they found by a preponderance of the evidence, which is the standard of proof in a protective order in Maryland, that abuse as defined in the earlier slide has occurred. So, so we haven't seen that. What we have seen is my last point, and I could have put 5 more things on here, but I think that the other panelists will have a lot to say about safety and safety planning and whatnot, so I didn't do that. But the biggest problem in this whole thing, and again, it's not just protective orders, but high conflict family law, custody, and visitation cases, has been what to do about child exchanges, visitation, and child access when, say, both households are not complying in the same way with COVID requirements or requests. When you have an at-risk, say, a parent living in your home who's immune compromised and at high risk, and you know that the other family is having parties, what's given rise is this issue of, I don't want to send my child over there where I don't think it's safe, and I think they're going to bring COVID back in the household, and somebody in my house is going to be infected. And it's complicated. All of the visitation centers have been closed. That is where you can go and have either safe exchange or an actual supervised visitation at the visitation center if the court deems it to be dangerous enough for the child. They've been closed. And so people who have these court orders that say visitation every Sunday or every other Sunday from 5 to 7 at the visitation center, there's been no opportunity to do that. And courts have had to struggle with how to allow parents to continue to have an in-person relationship with their child while keeping everybody safe. So I think, if somebody said, what's the biggest problem with COVID from the perspective of what we're talking about today, that's the biggest problem. The second biggest problem is financial. People who are ordered to pay emergency family maintenance, which is money essentially for the party who is getting the protective order, who say, well, I'm out of a job, I'm not working, I don't have any income. And what are courts supposed to do if people are not working? So that's been, I think, the secondary and most complicated factor during COVID completely. So this is the next. So like I said, to get a final protective, and I'm just going to say this in case people don't know, once you get a temporary protective order, it gets set in, and that's what they call ex parte. The other side is not there. You just have to prove by reasonable grounds that abuse as defined has occurred. You get set in 7 days later for a final protective order hearing. The protective order, the temporary, has to be served on the alleged abuser by law enforcement in the state of Maryland. That's not true in every state. In District of Columbia, I could get a process server. I could have my brother, my mother serve my alleged abuser. The DV community of Maryland has always opposed that for safety reasons. We prefer to have law enforcement serve. But assuming they're effective in serving him, which was also a problem ongoing during COVID because they had other priorities than service. Can you go back to the other slide? I'm sorry. So once they're served, you have to prove by putting on a trial, like I said, with evidence, with testimony, perhaps with a witness, perhaps with videotape, by a preponderance of the evidence that abuse as defined has occurred. A preponderance of the evidence means the court believes you 51% to the respondent 49%. The hardest cases we have are he said, she said cases, as we call them, with no external evidence. They didn't call law enforcement. They didn't have to get medical care. Nobody else witnessed it. It's her word against his or his word against hers. Those are hard, and that's on a preponderance standard. Sometimes the courts say, I can't tell. It's 50-50. I can't grant the order. But you have to prove by a preponderance that abuse has occurred. They usually last for 1 year, not all the time. I did not see any big change in the sort of frequency of courts entering orders for less than a year, for example. Usually they last for a year, but sometimes you see judges not wanting to do that. And sometimes it's fine. Sometimes the answer is, oh, I'm moving out of that apartment in 3 months. So I only need the order for 4 months to get myself settled at an undisclosed, address, for example. They can be entered into by consent of the respondent, and that means no finding of abuse by the court, no trial, no hearing, no evidence presented. And so the respondent essentially says, okay, I'll agree to this, and then it gets entered. And the advantage to that for respondents, and often for petitioners as well, is it can be shielded from the public case search, which is one of the biggest things we confront is case search, people not wanting to be able to be found. Service providers like us have mechanisms to see behind that case search wall, so we can protective orders even when they're not on public case search. This is what we call relief. This is what the court can order in a protective order: refrain from abuse or harassment, contact, refrain from going to the residence, vacate the home, use and possession of the home, stay away from work, school, daycare, other family members. They can order child exchanges to be at visitation centers, at police precincts. We have one right now that's at the movie theater for some reason that seems unfair to the movie theater, but that's where the exchange is. It's a public place, which is like about the best I can say for that, judge's choice. And they can order emergency family maintenance, as I said, which essentially is child support in a lot of instances. I'll go to the next slide because I don't remember what it is right now. Oh, I wanted to mention go back, Patrick. I'm sorry. There is an address confidentiality.
We got to do a 2-minute warning on this.
Okay, thank you. You can enter the address confidentiality program, which was on the I think the next slide, I can't remember. And these are all things you just need to know. If you're out there, the other people on the panel will help you with this, as will our attorneys if you want to be in the address confidentiality program. Obviously, if they know your address, there's no point in doing that in some ways. We can go to the next slide real fast. So, sometimes the order is denied. I'm sort of relying on my partners today to talk about some of these things. Safety planning, whether or not you have an order, is one of the most important things we and other advocates do for survivors of domestic violence. It's about changing your route to the Walmart, going to the Safeway across town rather than the one you're usually at, keeping records, and then calling again if there's a new incident. And the last thing is you can appeal a denied protective order, or the abuser can appeal a granted protective order from the district court to the circuit court. Those get set in pretty quickly. We had one a few weeks ago that was set in 5 days after he filed the appeal from district court. It was set in for a hearing the next Friday in circuit court, which was sort of unprecedented in terms of speed. I will say this about the courts. You can go to the next slide, Patrick, just so I don't miss anything. Oh yeah, this is just our final information. You can find us. You can find all of the providers that are going to be presenting today. This is Baltimore County specific. We also have projects in Baltimore City and Carroll County. And our class project, which I mentioned last year, is statewide. So they've been Prince George's, Montgomery, Howard, Hartford, Frederick. They've been all over, but we're mostly the Baltimore region, even in that project, just for practicality's sake. So, I guess my end message to finish up is, if you need help, seek it. We will do whatever we can to represent you. We work very fully with our partners like the House of Ruth, like Turnaround, who you're going to hear from, SafeWorks in Howard County, Stark in Hartford County. We all work together. I will call whoever and say, my lawyer is not available. Are you available? I will also say there are not enough attorneys to represent every single victim of domestic violence in Maryland or in Baltimore County. Not by a long shot. Only about 20% of people who should, in my view, have a lawyer for their protective order are able to obtain one. So I will finish if my time is up. I'm going to stay on here, but I confess I have a filing due in court by 5, and I'm going to be looking over here at my other computer to make sure it got filed appropriately because I don't want to mess up for my client. But I'll be on to listen in case we have a question and answer after this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. And our senator is running into the issues, and she texts me and she's there listening us, and she said that it is much needed, and she will be leaving in 10 minutes. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator. I'm sorry for the technical error, and the Senator is really appreciating our Baltimore County effort. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Laurie. That was very informative. Next, I'd like to introduce Amanda Rodriguez Esquire, who graduated from the University of Maryland at College Park in 2005 as the only candidate to receive the prestigious arts and law degree in her class. She received her Juris Doctorate from the University of Baltimore Law School in 2007. During her legal studies, she was the first student attorney in the Immigrants' Right Clinic at the University of Baltimore. Subsequently, she wrote numerous articles on the topic of the international implications of human trafficking on the United States economy, human trafficking prosecution and investigation, and domestic minor sex trafficking. Her articles have been published nationally and internationally. She was an assistant state's attorney for Baltimore County, where she oversaw all human trafficking investigations. In 2014, Mrs. Rodriguez transitioned to the role of Manager of Domestic Violence and Human Trafficking Policy for the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, and was appointed a Special Assistant United States Attorney, where she oversaw the statewide implementation of policy and protocol related to human trafficking in Maryland. She subsequently moved to leadership roles at local victim service agencies, and she accepted her current position of Executive Director of Turnaround, Baltimore's Rape Crisis Center, and a comprehensive domestic violence and human trafficking service provider in December of 2019. She is also currently the co-chair of the Legislative Subcommittee for the Human Trafficking Task Force. She has received numerous awards for her work on human trafficking in the state, including the Breakthrough Award from the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, a special citation from Baltimore County, 2 citations from the state of Maryland, and special recognition from the Baltimore U.S. Attorney's Office for her successful prosecution of traffickers involved in child exploitation and her commitment to human trafficking survivors. Additionally, she was recognized in 2014 as a leading woman by the Daily Record. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Roz, and thank you for including me in this presentation today. It is vitally important for us to be having this conversation, especially now during COVID. So I thank you for your time and your attention. So what I'm going to talk about is safety planning, which I think Lori set up really nicely in terms of her presentation. And safety planning has looked different in COVID. Some of the complications of COVID create really difficult scenarios for families within their homes and for individuals within their homes. And so I'm going to walk through what safety planning during this time has looked like at the agency that I work at Turnaround. I'm going to start though by just giving you a little background about who Turnaround is. So we are as Raz said, we're the Rape Crisis Center of Baltimore County and Baltimore City. We're also a comprehensive domestic violence provider and a provider for human trafficking survivors. We serve about 2,000 individuals a year. And the services look like case management, advocacy. We have crisis intervention services, which is a pantry, emergency shelter, transportation. We also do legal referrals. And one of our major service areas is therapy. So we provide therapy to survivors. We have a survivor right now who's as young as 2. He's 2 years old. And so, we serve survivors across the spectrum in terms of demographic. Just quickly talking about how COVID impacted us at our agency. And I had the very great benefit of starting my job December of 2019, not knowing that 3 months later we would be in the throes of COVID. And so, we were in the process of transitioning, and then all of a sudden I will never forget the date. It was March 17th. And it was like, okay, we've got to go completely remote. And so we did that. And as Lori alluded to, that led to a huge drop in terms of the call volume. We have seen that pick up. It started picking up for us mid-April. And we're now at 300% of what our normal call volume is for this time of year. The majority of the need that we've seen is around both therapy, legal, as Lori spoke to, and then also shelter. Shelter's been the biggest need with a 200% increase to this prior 6-month period. For our agency, the way that that has played out is that even though there's an increased call overall, we saw there was an increased need in terms of those that were being affected as a result of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So we saw a decrease in sexual violence, a small decrease in our trafficking numbers, but an increase in DV, and that's on top of the increase of the 300% more people calling. The other thing that we noticed in that is that there was an increase in multiple victimizations, meaning someone that came in and was victimized through sexual violence and then also through intimate partner violence. And why that's important in terms of the conversation about safety planning is that safety planning is going to look a little bit different from someone that has multiple things going on, multiple types of victimizations or multiple maybe past traumas that they're coping with. So in talking about safety, safety in terms of COVID, as I said, looks different than maybe some advice that we give to an individual in a circumstance where you're not in a pandemic and you're not living at home with your abuser. Or maybe there are, I can't go stay with my parents because I don't want to possibly infect my parents with COVID or expose them to COVID. One of the things that we've noticed is that there is that additional emotional and financial control that's being put on individuals as a result of COVID. And so that also plays into how you safety plan because you may not have access to finances to get out. And so the way that we think about safety planning at Turnaround is we kind of start with an individual should trust their gut, right? If you feel like something is not right or that something is going to explode, then that needs to be a consideration that you have because you're going to know the situation better than anyone else. And so you want to plan for what could possibly be coming. And we know that as a result of COVID, right, the stress is up, it's elevated. We know that, financial struggles can lead to increase in stress in the home. And so all of those things play into this dynamic. So what we recommend first is that it's really about thinking forward, right? And considering what's happening and how you can respond to it. So one is becoming familiar with safe spaces or safe places within your community. So places like Family Crisis Center, like the Women's Law Center, like Turnaround, considering that those places where they are, what they offer in terms of services so that you have access if you need it in the immediate and you're not searching for it in a crisis. Another consideration is making sure that and I know Valerie's going to speak to this, but where your rape crisis center is, where you can go for specific medical care as a result of an abusive incident or if you need assistance. And GBMC is a great place for that if you're here in Baltimore County. The other is creating a code word, and this is really intended for how you communicate with your children. So we know that, kids are at home too right now as a result of schools being virtual. And so are there ways for you to communicate with your kids so that they're not, so that they understand that maybe they need to do something? We're not saying to put it on the children. We're certainly saying, maybe there's something that you can communicate to them, like mommy needs you to know how to call 911, or here's a code word that I can give you so that you can, if I'm in trouble or if I can't call 911 or I can't run to the neighbor's house, I will give you maybe it's a, dragon is the word. And so when that word is said, that mommy just needs some help and maybe we can figure it out. But I think that it's important to make sure that you're communicating with your children because we know that there is a huge impact on kids if they're witnessing domestic violence. And it's a completely traumatic incident by itself that we have to make sure that we're assisting families with. And so I think that we need to make sure that we're including children in the safety planning or including at least thinking it through as the parent of how can I support my children knowing that there is the potential of this, incident occurring. One is around computer safety. So often that's something that we don't think about, but now we are on computers all the time. And there are lots of apps that allow for abusers to maintain control or at least surveillance on survivors. And so making sure that you're monitoring, the apps that are on your computer, that you're clearing your caches, that you're looking for different, keeping abreast of kind of current technology so that you're able to also, because the reality is if you're on the computer and you're searching out some of these safe places, if an abuser has access and is able to see that you're doing that, they could potentially know where you're headed. And we've had, the unfortunate thing is during abusive incidents, we have had abusers show up at our office, for example, because they had trackers on the survivor's phone. And so it is important to maintain that safety as much as you possibly can. The one that has actually been the most impacted as a result of COVID is the fourth one, which is leaning on a support network. So that's much harder in COVID. Individuals simply are not able to, like I said, go to their parents' house or maybe go to a friend's house, because what's happening instead is they don't want to expose that individual, or that individual maybe works in an environment where they're more exposed to COVID and they don't want to bring their, the survivor doesn't want to bring their children into that home. And so it is identifying at this point in time, do you have a support network that can help? And I think that's a really important thought process to go through as you're doing this safety planning. Preparing an excuse is an excuse to get out of the home. Is there an excuse that you can come up with that will sound legitimate? Like, I need to go to the grocery store. I need to go to the pharmacy. Is there a way for you to make sure that there is the opportunity for you to create some space between yourself and the abuser? There's a case that we had at Turnaround where there was a survivor who the only way that she was able to make contact with us was via Facebook. And it was a really interesting scenario because we had just started this really big social media campaign. And then all of a sudden we started to get communication through Facebook Messenger, which should have been something we thought about, but we hadn't. And so she started to reach out that way. And we, in terms of safety planning, were able to identify a moment in time where the abuser would be less likely to be fully engaged kind of in what she had going on at home. He actually had some work outside of the home. So there was like this period of time where he had a staff meeting. And so she could get out, and we helped her create that excuse to be able to say, oh, you're going to go into your staff meeting. I'm going to go do X, Y, or Z, at the grocery store or wherever it was that she was going. And it created that space for her to be able to actually, to get away and to come to for us to provide her emergency housing. And then the last one's around staying safe at home. And it's really about identifying the possible dangers and risks that you have when you're at home and acknowledging them. So things like, making sure that you train yourself to know where the exit is in a room at all times. Making sure that if you're noticing there is an explosive kind of incident that's going to occur, that you're not walking into the kitchen or the bathroom where there's potentially knives or other chemicals that could harm you. It's about creating an exit plan overall. There used to be, in domestic violence, we talked a lot about go bags. But the idea, like Lori said, is making sure where your records are, that you understand, what you need if you leave, so that you don't have to have that excuse to come back into the house. Really thinking through that on the front end. And also, again, identifying the scenarios in which you would be at most at risk at home so that you can plan for that. So one of the things that I think is most helpful, and it has been in my work with survivors, is around, do I understand as someone that is being victimized by intimate partner violence, what that abusive cycle looks like, so that I can best prepare for when something is going to happen. So we look at things like, the honeymoon stage, which is this initial stage that occurs where things seem great. And there's this hope that things are going to be okay or going to be better. And then you see tension building and things start to happen within the relationship, and that relationship. And so you'll say, this is making me feel a little, I'll use a survivor's word, a little hinky. Like, I'm not quite sure what's happening right now, but I know that something doesn't quite feel right. And so you may feel like the example here is walking on eggshells. So you start to kind of live that in your daily life. And then something happens, right? There's a trigger and something happens and there's an explosion, whether that's verbal or, a financial explosion in terms of financial abuse, whether it's physical abuse. And that kind of explosion, there's a lot of volatility in that moment. And then it kind of slips back into this, the honeymoon stage all over again. The representative stage is kind of this interesting idea where it's about the survivor and the abuser wanting things to look like everything is fine. You know, we've heard a lot about like these Instagram kind of family scenarios where people seem to, you look on the outside and things look great. And that's kind of the constant place that these survivors are living in. And so it's really about, you know, if you are a survivor, understanding what that looks like in your relationship so that you can plan and so that you are able to get out if you want to. The other opportunity that this kind of gives you, if you're thinking through this, is there are programs and agencies that can help just with the safety planning. So agencies like Turnaround, like Family Crisis Center, like that's what we are here for. And so if you call, you can speak to an advocate and they can just talk you through kind of, here's some things maybe to think about specific to your situation. You're not alone. There are people there that are ready and willing to help you. And so on that note, this is our 24/7 helpline. So we serve, again, survivors of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, which domestic violence is similar to that, sexual violence, and human trafficking. And this number is answered by staff 24/7. So we're always available if you need us. And, you know, just make sure that you're taking care of yourself, you're looking out for yourself, you know, and hopefully you won't need to call, but if you do, we are here. On that note, I think I'm turning it back over to Roz.
Amanda, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good information to remember. I'd like to introduce next Valerie Weir. Valerie is the Domestic Violence Coordinator of the Greater Baltimore Medical Center Safe and Domestic Violence Program, and she also functions as one of the forensic nurse examiners within the program. Valerie has been an employee at GBMC since 2001. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from Village Lee College. She has been a registered nurse since 2005. Throughout the 18 years that Valerie has been at GBMC, she's held many positions and filled many roles in areas of gynecological and women's health. Valerie completed her forensic nurse training in GBMC in 2015 and joined the GBMC SAFE program. And SAFE stands for Sexual Assault Forensic Examinations, for those of you who are not aware of that. She holds current certifications to provide care to adolescents, adults, as well as pediatrics. She is certified to care for patients across the lifespan that have been victims of sexual assault, rape, child abuse, both physical and sexual, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. She has been a great asset and support in aiding the SAFE and Domestic Violence Program, expanding their pediatric resources and focus. In 2017, Valerie was nominated for both the Compassionate Caregiver Award as well as the Nurse Clinician of the Year Award. In addition to her work within the hospital, Valerie has made community education a priority. She has assisted in and led lectures in county high schools, colleges, and other organizations within Baltimore County and the surrounding areas on healthy relationships, boundaries, internet safety, strangulation, domestic and intimate partner violence, and the services offered at GBMC. Valerie is chair of the GBMC Domestic Violence Advisory Board. She is an active member of the Baltimore County Sexual Assault Response Team, as well as the Maryland Child Abuse Medical Providers. Ms. Ware also actively participates on the Baltimore County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, GBMC's Child Protection Program, and the Maryland Healthcare Coalition Against Domestic Violence as a member of their steering committee. Valerie is a lifelong resident of Maryland. She is a mother to 3 amazing tiny humans and 2 four-legged fur children.
Thanks, Roz.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you guys for all coming to listen to us give you this information and advice around what we do every day, and I think what we are passionate about. As Roz said, my name is Valerie. I am one of the forensic nurses at GBMC for the Safe and Domestic Violence Program, as well as the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the program. So who are we and what do we do? I'll just give you a little bit of a background on why a nurse is coming here to talk to you about domestic violence. So the Safe and Domestic Violence Program at GBMC is the sole medical forensic program within Baltimore County and parts of Harford County that provide the medical forensic services for victims of sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, non-fatal strangulation, human trafficking, and child physical and sexual abuse. In Baltimore County, we are the sole provider. For Harford County, they have a program that provides care for those ages 13 and over, but the children from Harford County and parts of Cecil County that are 12 and under will come down to us to get their care. So we provide care for patients across the lifespan. The youngest patient that we have ever provided care for was under 9 months old, and our oldest patient was 98 years old. All of our services are completely free, and our patients will never receive a bill. While providing the care, we provide all of the options for our patients to maintain their safety and confidentiality, and that varies depending on what they're coming in to see us for. As far as sexual assault, we provide them options to either have law enforcement involved if that's what they choose to do. They also have the option to have an anonymous report or a Jane or John Doe exam completed if they're not quite ready to have the law enforcement aspect into that investigation. They also have the option to come to the hospital just to make sure that they're okay. They can come to us and just have a medical evaluation to make sure that they're healthy and that they're safe and that they can go home feeling confident that they're healthy. We provide all of our care in a private and secure suite that is separate from the emergency department. We are very fortunate to have the support from GBMC, and we have a new suite that was built just a few months ago that provides, has a separate entrance that law enforcement and our patients can come to, so they don't have to come through the emergency department. In addition to providing services for patients after an acute assault, whether it be a sexual assault or strangulation or a physical assault, every patient that comes into the hospital is screened for abuse, whether they come in to have surgery, if they come in to have a baby, if they come in through the emergency department, or if they're admitted on a unit for any other medical issue. Also, as a complement to our medical services, we provide education and outreach to the community, completely free of charge. We have a community outreach coordinator who can give information out for all of those education opportunities. One question that we'll often get is, why do we have a program like this in a hospital? And the reason behind that is, being in healthcare, we're in a very unique position to meet patients who've been a victim of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Sometimes there's still some shame or embarrassment that comes with being in a situation like this, and often people don't know where to go. And sometimes it's hard to pick up the phone and call a hotline and to put that information out there. However, when someone is comfortable coming in for medical treatment, whether it's their primary care provider or whether it's a nurse or a physician that they meet in the emergency department, people tend to feel a little bit more comfortable speaking to that healthcare provider. So allowing them to come into us and be vulnerable and for us to be able to provide these services for them is huge. It also helps us as medical providers to learn about their history of abuse, whether it is a current situation that they're living through or it's a history of abuse, because domestic violence has a huge impact on someone's medical health, both physical health and mental health. So knowing this about a patient helps us to give them better care and to give them better resources and serve them in a more appropriate way. So due to COVID, we had to make some changes. One thing about the job that we do, because we are in healthcare, we're still there 24/7, 365, and we have been from the very beginning of COVID. A lot of places, whether medical related or government related or wherever, we're switching to remote working. And that's not something that healthcare has the opportunity to do, just because we need to provide care for those patients. But what we did do is we tried to modify our workflow to make it safer for our patient population, and essentially to keep healthy patients out of the emergency department. So anyone who drove past a hospital, any given hospital, from the beginning of COVID, saw those big, saw the big tents that were out front of the emergency department. And they're kind of scary. And when you come to the emergency department, we've had people who said, I drove to the hospital and I saw the tent and I had to turn around and leave. And we didn't want the precautions that were being put in place for COVID to deter anyone from coming in for the help that we and the services that we provided. So we worked with the leadership at GBMC, as well as our community partners, and we kind of adapted to the point where our patients didn't even have to go to the emergency department. If they had law enforcement involved, they would come directly to our suite. We have a door that's ground level that they could come to, as well as an entrance to the hospital, which is right next to our suite, where the patients and law enforcement could come in. They would still get the same COVID screening that you would get in the emergency department. They would still get their temperature taken. They would still ensure that the proper PPE was being worn, but then they could come directly to us, which is about 15 feet away from the door, and it completely bypassed that emergency department. Not only was it a fear for adult patients that were coming in, but also for our kiddos. We do child abuse, we do physical abuse and sexual abuse. And as a parent, having to bring your child to the hospital during a pandemic is something that not many parents wanted to do. So being able to ease their mind and give them the option to come directly to our unit was something that really helped the parents or guardians of our kids, as well as other kids in the county, with our collaboration with the Child Advocacy Center. So I'll skip down to that one. During COVID, the Child Advocacy Center has temporarily closed. So the kids that would normally be seen there, whether it is an acute sexual abuse situation or a delayed report, which means it happened weeks or months prior, they weren't going to get any medical care. Typically once a week, one of our nurses would go over to the Advocacy Center to provide those medical exams for the kids. But with the Advocacy Center being temporarily closed, those kids were potentially going to have to wait months to have that medical care that they needed. We were able to work with them, and now the kids and the investigators and social workers will come over to GBMC and utilize our suite, so the kids can get their acute exams done, as well as the non-acute exams or the later exams for the kids. We also have an interview room that has AV capabilities, so the detectives can do the appropriate interviews. So it was just a nice complement to what our program already does, and it helped out another one of our community agencies as well, which was great. Also, with us being healthcare, the victim advocates that we have that see patients, we continue to see those patients face to face, which is huge. There are a lot of places that went completely remote, and because we're a hospital, we were able to keep that face-to-face interaction for any patients that came in after an acute assault. When someone comes in after a sexual assault or after being strangled by their intimate partner or someone that they know, it was just nice to have someone there to give them that emotional support, to help them with the safety planning, to give them referrals to other places in the county, and to be able to do that on a more personal level. Even though they were 6 feet apart at a table, they still got to give that personal interaction with someone, which is huge. So in that, with our advocates, they not only will see those patients after those acute assaults, but all of the patients who are screened in the hospital for abuse, the advocates will also respond out to those patients, typically at the bedside or in the emergency department, to also give them that emotional support, the grounding techniques, and referrals to any other outside agencies that they need, such as Turnaround, House of Ruth, Family Crisis Center, depending on what their needs are. As a hospital, we're unable to provide that emergency shelter for our patients. So we rely on places like Turnaround and Family Crisis Center and House of Ruth to get our patients to a safer place. We are fortunate enough to be able to work with them in giving our survivors what they need to be able to move on. While we're sending them to somewhere safer to stay, we will often say that patients come to us with just the clothes on their back. If they're leaving a violent situation after an assault, they likely didn't pack a bag, or if they don't have a bag in another safe place, they literally have just the clothes on their back. Depending on what happened, we sometimes have to take those clothes as part of their exam. So we're able to not only provide them with clothing that day, so we're not sending them home in scrubs or anything else that you've heard people be sent home from a hospital in. We're actually able to send them home in new clothes to make them feel a little bit more normal as they're walking out of the hospital. We're also fortunate enough with the getaway bags. If it's, for example, mom and 2 children, we have enough to supply mom and the kids with an outfit for 2 or 3 days. Funds to help her get to Walmart and get formula or diapers or things that we may not have on hand, which is huge for someone when you're trying to get them to some sort of normalcy after they've come to you for a medical exam like this. Some of the trends that we have seen throughout COVID, as many people will say, there was a little bit of a dip in April as far as our calls and in-person consults, even within the hospital. We kind of attribute that to it being at the beginning, most people were in that stay-at-home, mandatory stay-at-home quarantine type stage, and not many people were venturing out. But what we did start to see in about May and June is our numbers, both calls and in-person consults, we're getting back to our normal. Some of the patients were coming in just to get information, but what we did see is that a lot of the patients that were making their way to us, they were making their way to us because they really didn't have another choice. This wasn't a bruise or a slap that they obtained at home in their relationship, but the injuries were a lot more severe. Over the course of the last couple of months, we've had multiple patients come in with, we call them orbital fractures, but they're bones around the eyes. We've had, I believe, 2 or 3 patients come in whose jaws have been broken, both of which required surgery and having that set so things could heal, which also resulted in a subsequent hospital stay. We provide medical forensic exams for patients who are strangled. Some of those strangulations are worse than others. We've had patients who were admitted to our ICU because they had a bleeding in their brain as a result of the assault. We had another patient who was in the hospital for complications for over 3 weeks. The patients that come to us, like I said, their injuries have just gotten a lot worse. The situations that they're in have gotten a lot worse. Another trend that we've seen is an increase in our pregnant and postpartum population. We have always kept track of those patients that reach out to us either while they're in labor and delivery or postpartum, or the ones who call us for information within like those first 6 to 12 months of having a baby. Research has always shown that the incidence of domestic violence can either begin or increase during pregnancy, and that is something that has been completely exacerbated in the pandemic and through COVID. Out of the inpatient consults that I do, over 50% of them are now patients that are in our maternal newborn health area.
Sorry to interrupt, Valerie. We got to come close to wrapping up the segment here.
Okay.
All right, but how many more slides do you have left?
I think 2 or 3, not many.
All righty, let's see if you can power through them.
I will. Thank you for the warning.
Absolutely.
So at the beginning of COVID, no one was allowed to have visitors. So a lot of our patients came in, they were completely by themselves at the bedside, so they were free to discuss a lot of their situation with us, which was great. With labor and delivery, they were still allowed to have their support person there, but often that support person had to leave for other family matters or work matters or whatever. And they were only allowed to have that one person here or at the hospital. So when that person was gone, the patient in labor and delivery was a little bit safer in discussing all of that with us. So we have seen a huge increase in that population. One of the concerns that we have around our pregnant population is just the risks that domestic violence can have on pregnancy. Preterm labor, miscarriage, low birth weight, anemia and bleeding for mom, poor eating habits. Additional issues throughout COVID, just to name two. One was access to healthcare. For a few reasons. One, if mom was coming in for prenatal care and a support person wasn't allowed with her, often we heard that they just wouldn't let mom go to the appointments at all. Also, coming to the hospital, kind of a scary place when you've got the tents outside. So sometimes the abusers would restrict that access to healthcare with the intent of saying that they were trying to keep them safer. So just the takeaways from what I've talked about, sexual assault, domestic violence, child physical and sexual abuse does not discriminate. It has not stopped due to the pandemic. At GBMC, we are available 24/7, 365 days a year, and we've maintained that throughout the entire pandemic. All of our services, forensic services and advocacy services are completely free of charge. We provide all of our care in a safe, secure suite. And no matter what position you are in, we urge all victims to seek help in whatever way is safe for you. If it's safe to call, to come in, looking online, whatever you need, we are here to help. And then with that, and trying to end it, this is our contact information. And we always say you are not alone. We are here to help. That's it.
Valerie, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
It's really good to know that there is somebody always available to help you. I would like to introduce Amy Post. Amy is a marriage and family therapist who is currently serving as the executive clinical director at the Family Crisis Center of Baltimore County. After 3 decades of working in a variety of education and human services positions, Amy has a deep appreciation for the challenges human families face every day in adapting to life. In her current role, Amy is committed assisting individuals, families, and communities prevent and interrupt cycles of violence so that we can all grow stronger and move boldly into the future. Amy is a member of the Clinical Fellow of the American Associations of Marriage and Family Therapists, and an active with the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family as a board and faculty member. Amy holds an MA in Marriage and Family Therapy from the Seton Hill University. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be with you all today and discussing these important topics. I'm grateful to my colleagues who are leaders in their field around responding to the challenges of domestic violence and the impact that victims face in being able to be safe and move forward. The Family Crisis Center has existed for over 40 years. We provide a variety of comprehensive services. My goal today is to talk to you about not needing to wait until the crisis to seek help. As Amanda and Valerie and Lori all pointed out, in the cycle of violence, there are a lot of ways to respond to that once the explosion happens. You've heard about the SAFE program, you've heard about Turnaround in the Women's Law Center. The Baltimore County Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Hotline is also available. I'm here to tell you a little bit about the goal of learning to do prevention work, and that means being aware of the potentiality for these kind of problems to emerge in relationships and taking action and steps before the problem escalates to be able to be safer moving forward. You're familiar with prevention efforts across the world around wearing seatbelts, having healthy heart habits early on in your life, and moving sooner rather than later to prevent things like diabetes and even forms of cancer. The cycle of violence in most experiences does not come out of nowhere, but it's a pattern of escalation. The image behind the print images it's called a cascading spiral. With each level of repetition in the cycle, the intensity of the cycle increases over and over again. While we've heard about lots of places to go at the explosion stage when conflict and violence are so intense that immediate relief needs to happen, these patterns exist between partners for long periods of time before that escalation builds up. You can begin to notice these patterns of tension, release, recovery, planfulness, and start to think about whether or not you want to intervene sooner. The other thing that I'm going to introduce is that the idea that any family member who's observing these patterns in one or another family members can also seek resources sooner rather than waiting until later. And the Family Crisis Center provides community-based services that focus on 4 main areas. These are on safety and stability, effectiveness through building skills, having positive and resourceful connection, and building family resilience and well-being. Our aim is that through offering counseling, family-centered coaching, parenting coaching, groups, advocacy, and aftercare is not only to interrupt and respond to crisis levels, but to begin to build capacity in relationships that would ultimately mitigate or prevent crisis ever happening. So my key message to you is you don't have to wait until a crisis happens to begin to seek help to have a healthier relationship. Baltimore County is very fortunate because we have an extraordinary set of services, resources, and systems of care that work effectively together as a cohesive team to respond to folks who are in crisis. But you don't have to wait for crisis to begin to seek help. And you can start to notice patterns that lead to escalation before abuse becomes debilitating. Seeking help sooner doesn't mean that you have something wrong. It means actually you're being really wise and working to build strength in your family that will trickle down for generations to come. So I invite you, if you're interested in seeking help before the crisis happens, to take the next step and reach out to the Family Crisis Center to set up some community-based services. I'm going to pause now. I feel like everybody else did such a great job that I can clean up HIT with just 5 minutes. So thank you so much for this chance.
Wow. I would like to thank Delegate Bandari for asking the commission to partner with him for this webinar. I want to say thank you very much to all of our presenters. And I'd like to also thank everyone who took time out of their Friday afternoon to participate today. I want everybody to have a great weekend, and please, everyone, stay safe.
But before we go, just a couple things. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. And also, I had promised Rosalind that we would share the resource card, the Get Help card for Baltimore County. And I just want to put that on screen for everybody right now. That way, you know, everybody has access to it. So here it is. If you want to take a screenshot of it, or even, you know, if you have any questions, you can always email Delegate Bandari's office and we can, you know, help you get what you need in regards to resources and connecting you with the right people. And this resource card is a very big help with that. So thank you very much for sending that along, Rosalind.
Yeah,
My
thank
pleasure.
you. Yeah, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everybody, and my colleagues. Delegate Carl Jackson could not be with us, but he really appreciate. He represents District 8 as well. Patrick, and thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you. And our friends, Dadiji, for the technical support, and everybody for listening to us, and Padamji, all the way from Texas and all the way from Virginia, for all of your technical support. Patrick, you want to say a few words and we can conclude?
I think that covers it. So we'll have this up in video form and we can send this out to everybody as well. I know that there were a whole bunch of people watching on our live streams and everything like that. So hopefully this has reached a lot of people.
And thank you all the media partners in Nepalese, Kasukas, BRT Nepal, Hollywood Cover, Everest Times, and the Gautam Dal as well. Thank you everybody. Thank you.
All right, everybody have a wonderful weekend.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Thank you.